Don't Let Me Marry Her, a moonlit garden, a billionaire groom in a tailored tuxedo, his voice trembling as he grabs Ebony Carter's arm and whispers. The words hang in the air, a desperate plea that unravels a web of blackmail, betrayal, and a daring escape from a wedding that's all for show. What would you do if you were Ebony, caught in a billionaire's crisis? Where are you listening from? New York, London, or maybe somewhere far off like Sydney? Drop a comment below and share your city, plus your guess about how this wild story unfolds. Will it end in freedom or heartbreak? Subscribe and hit the bell to catch our latest videos, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. This tale of secrets and courage will keep you guessing. Why did he choose her, and what's at stake? Ebony Carter sat at her small kitchen table in her Atlanta apartment, the morning sun spilling through the window, casting long shadows across a cluttered pile of mail. Bills, flyers, and a coupon for a coffee shop she never visited lay scattered like fallen leaves. Her fingers, stained faintly with ink from a late-night event planning session, sifted through the stack with practiced indifference. She was used to the routine, sort, sigh, set aside for later. But then her hand brushed against something different, something that didn't belong in her world of practicality and modest means. It was an envelope, heavy and luxurious, its cream paper so thick it seemed to hum with importance. Gold embossing framed her name, Ebony Carter, in calligraphy so delicate it looked like it had been painted by an artist's hand. She froze, her breath catching, as if touching it might burn her. She turned the envelope over, her heart quickening. The wax seal bore a crest she didn't recognize, but it screamed wealth, old, untouchable wealth. With a careful tug, she broke the seal, revealing an invitation that glowed like a jewel in the morning light. Julian Hawthorne and Isabella Langley were to be wed at the Crestwood estate, a place Ebony had only seen in glossy magazines. The words shimmered in gold ink, each letter a testament to extravagance. Her mind reeled. Julian Hawthorne wasn't just a name, he was a legend, a tech billionaire who'd built an empire from nothing, his blonde hair and piercing blue eyes gracing every business journal in the country. Isabella Langley, the heiress, was his perfect match. Old money, polished, untouchable. But why was Ebony, an event planner, scraping by, holding an invitation to their wedding? Her thoughts spun back to 8 months ago, to a charity gala she'd orchestrated for foster youth. The memory was vivid, the ballroom's chandeliers casting prisms across the crowd, the clink of champagne flutes, the murmur of the elite. Ebony had been in her element, clipboard in hand, ensuring every detail was flawless. Then Julian had walked in, not with the arrogance she'd expected from a billionaire, but with a quiet intensity. He'd donated $500,000 to the cause, a sum that had made her jaw drop. But it was his eyes that stayed with her. When she introduced herself, thanking him for his generosity, he looked at her, not through her, not past her to someone more important, but at her, as if she were the only person in the room. They'd talked for 20 minutes, an eternity in the frenetic pace of a gala. He asked about the kids, the program, and her work. His voice was warm, grounded, not the polished charm of a man used to getting his way. He shared a story about his mother, who'd grown up in poverty, her lessons of humility shaping him. Then, as the band struck up a slow jazz number, he did something that stunned her. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, his hand extended, his smile genuine. Ebony, in her simple black dress, felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't there to mingle with guests, let alone billionaires. But his sincerity disarmed her, and she took his hand. The dance was brief, one song, but it felt like a moment carved out of time. They swayed under the chandeliers, talking about dreams, hers to build her own event planning business, his to make a difference beyond his wealth. There was no flirtation, no ulterior motive, just a connection, raw and real, like two strangers sharing a secret. When the song ended, he thanked her, his eyes lingering before he was pulled back into the crowd. She hadn't seen him since. No calls, no messages, just the memory of a dance that felt like a dream. Now, holding this invitation, Ebony felt that moment rush back, vivid as ever. Why her? Why now? She set the invitation down, its weight anchoring her thoughts. Her apartment, with its chipped paint and secondhand furniture, seemed to shrink around it. She grabbed her phone and called Tanya, her best friend, whose voice was a lifeline in moments of chaos. "Girl, you won't believe this," Ebony said, her words tumbling out. She described the envelope, the invitation, the absurdity of it all. Tanya's laughter crackled through the line. "Ebony, this is your Cinderella moment, but you're already invited to the ball. You have to go. Who knows what doors this could open?" Ebony laughed, but doubt gnawed at her. She was no Cinderella, and this was no fairy tale. She was a black woman who'd clawed her way through a competitive industry, navigating rooms where she was often the only one who looked like her. The Crestwood estate was a world of private jets and vacation homes, a world that didn't welcome people like her unless they were serving drinks or checking codes. Yet the invitation felt personal, like a message meant for her alone. Was it a mistake? A whim? Or did Julian remember their dance as clearly as she did? She paced her tiny living room, the invitation glowing on the table like a beacon. Part of her wanted to toss it in the trash, to stay in her safe, predictable life. But another part, the part that dreamed of bigger things, the part that still felt Julian's hand in hers, urged her forward. What would it hurt to go? A glimpse into the lives of the ultra-rich, a chance to network, maybe even a story to tell. Tanya's words echoed, "You're already invited." Ebony stopped pacing, her decision crystallizing. She'd go, but she'd need to prepare. The next day, she walked into a boutique she'd never dared enter, the kind where the staff eyed her like she didn't belong. She ignored their glances and chose a sapphire gown that hugged her curves and shimmered like the night sky. At the salon, her braids were styled into an elegant updo, each twist a reminder of her strength. As she looked in the mirror, she saw not just Ebony Carter, event planner, but a woman ready to step into the unknown. The Crestwood estate awaited, and with it, a mystery she couldn't ignore. What did Julian want? Why was she there? The answers lay ahead, wrapped in gold and secrets, pulling her toward a night that would change everything. Ebony Carter gripped the steering wheel of her modest Honda, her knuckles tight as she navigated the winding road to the Crestwood estate. The sapphire gown she'd splurged on shimmered faintly in the passenger seat, a stark contrast to the car's worn interior. Her heart thrummed with a mix of anticipation and dread, like a drumbeat urging her toward an unknown fate. The estate loomed ahead, its silhouette rising against the twilight sky like a palace from a forgotten era. Rolling hills stretched endlessly, their manicured perfection framed by ancient oaks. The mansion itself was a masterpiece, ivory stone, towering columns, and windows that glowed with golden light, promising a world of opulence Ebony had only glimpsed in dreams. She pulled into the valet line, her car a humble intruder between a sleek Lamborghini and a gleaming Maserati. The valet, in crisp black, raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she stepped out, smoothing her gown. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and wealth. Guests flowed toward the entrance, their designer dresses and tailored suits moving like a choreographed dance. Diamonds glittered on wrists and throats, catching the light like tiny stars. Ebony felt every eye on her, not hostile, but curious, as if they were trying to place her in their hierarchy of importance. She squared her shoulders, her braids swept into an elegant updo, and walked forward, her heels clicking on the cobblestone path. The weight of being the only black woman in sight settled on her, familiar yet heavy. She was used to navigating spaces where she stood out, but this was different. This was the Crestwood estate, a playground for the elite, where every glance felt like a question. Who are you, and why are you here? Inside, the grandeur hit her like a wave. The foyer was a cathedral of wealth, marble floors veined with gold, crystal chandeliers casting prisms across the walls, and white roses cascading from every surface. Silk drapes framed arched windows, their fabric likely worth more than her yearly salary. The buzz of conversation filled the air, a symphony of privilege, snippets about private jets, vineyard acquisitions, and summer homes in the Hamptons. Ebony clutched her small purse, a thrift store find she'd polished to pass muster, and moved toward the seating area. Her place card, tucked discreetly at a table near the back, suited her just fine. From there, she could observe without being noticed, a silent spectator in a world that wasn't hers. The venue was a masterpiece of excess. Tables groaned under the weight of silver candelabras and bone china, each setting arranged with military precision. A string quartet played softly, their notes weaving through the crowd like a spell. Waiters glided past, offering flutes of champagne that sparkled like liquid gold. Ebony took one, more to blend in than to drink, her fingers brushing the cold glass. She scanned the room, noting the wedding party's polished perfection. Bridesmaids in pale gold gowns flitted about, their laughter bright but brittle. The groomsmen in tailored tuxedos stood tall, their smiles practiced. Yet beneath the surface, something felt off, like a painting with a crack running through it. Isabella Langley was impossible to miss. She moved through the crowd like a queen, her platinum blonde hair cascading in perfect waves, her ivory gown clinging to her like a second skin. She barked orders at the wedding planner, a harried woman with a clipboard, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "The roses aren't centered," Isabella snapped, pointing at a flawless arrangement. The planner scurried to adjust it, her face pale. When photographers approached, Isabella's demeanor shifted instantly. Her smile radiant, her posture impeccable, every inch the blushing bride. But the moment the cameras turned away, her face hardened, her eyes cold as frost. Ebony watched, her event planner's instincts cataloging the dissonance. The bridesmaids hovered nearby, their glances darting to Isabella as if afraid to displease her. Even the vendors seemed on edge, their movements hurried under her gaze. Then she saw Julian Hawthorne. He stood near the altar, adjusting his tie for what seemed like the 100th time. His blonde hair caught the light, his tuxedo accentuating his broad shoulders, every inch the billionaire groom. But his eyes told a different story. They were empty, distant, like a man staring into a void. He should have been radiant, basking in the happiest day of his life. But he looked like he was attending his execution. Ebony's heart twisted, the memory of their dance at the gala flashing through her mind. The way his eyes had seen her, truly seen her, for those fleeting minutes. Now he seemed a shadow of that man, trapped in a gilded cage. As she watched, Julian's gaze swept the room and landed on her. For a moment, the world stilled. His face softened, a flicker of relief breaking through the emptiness. It was as if her presence was a lifeline, a tether to something real in this sea of artifice. Ebony's breath caught, her pulse quickening. Why did he look at her like that? What was he hiding behind those haunted blue eyes? She shifted in her seat, suddenly aware of the weight of the invitation that had brought her here. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a summons, a pull towards something she didn't yet understand. The quartet's music swelled, signaling the ceremony's approach. Guests began to take their seats, their chatter softening to a hum. Ebony stayed where she was, her eyes flicking between Isabella's icy command and Julian's quiet despair. The cracks in the fairy tale were widening, and she was caught in their pull. She didn't belong here, yet she couldn't look away. Something was coming, something that would shatter the perfection of this day, and Ebony Carter, with her sapphire gown and quiet strength, was about to step into its heart. The Crestwood estate thrummed with anticipation, the air thick with the scent of roses and the murmur of the elite settling into their seats. Ebony Carter sat at her table near the back, her sapphire gown catching the chandelier light, her fingers tracing the rim of an untouched champagne flute. The string quartet's melody had faded, replaced by a hushed expectancy as the wedding party took their places. Ebony's eyes, sharp from years of orchestrating events, scanned the scene, noting every detail, the vendors' nervous glances, the bridesmaids' forced smiles, the groomsmen's stiff postures. But it was Julian Hawthorne standing near the altar who held her attention. His blonde hair gleamed under the soft glow, his tuxedo impeccable, yet his hands betrayed him, fidgeting with his cufflinks as if seeking an anchor. His face, handsome and composed, was a mask, but his blue eyes were a storm, restless, searching, and unmistakably lost. Ebony's heart gave a quiet lurch. She'd seen that look before, not in person, but in the eyes of clients at her events, the ones who smiled for the crowd, but unraveled in private moments. Julian was no client, though. He was a billionaire, a man who could buy anything, except, it seemed, his peace. As the officiant stepped forward, signaling the ceremony's imminent start, Julian's gaze swept the room, a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. It landed on Ebony, and for a heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them. His eyes softened, a flicker of relief breaking through the storm, as if her presence was a raft in a sea of chaos. Her breath caught, the memory of their dance at the gala 8 months ago flashing like lightning. His hand in hers, his voice warm with stories of his mother's humble roots. That Julian had been alive, present. This one looked like he was drowning. She shifted in her seat, her pulse quickening. Why her? Why did his eyes seek her out in a room full of the rich and powerful? The weight of the golden invitation that had brought her here pressed against her thoughts, no longer just a curiosity but a tether to something unspoken. Before she could dwell on it, Julian started moving, weaving through the crowd with purpose. Guests parted for him, their whispers trailing like ripples. There's the groom, so handsome, so lucky. If only they could see what she saw. He reached her table, his presence commanding yet fragile, like a statue on the verge of cracking. "Ebony," he said, his voice low and warm, but threaded with an urgency that made her skin prickle. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Her lips parted, but words felt inadequate. "Julian," she managed, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I wouldn't miss it." A polite lie, but it earned a faint smile from him, one that didn't reach his eyes. He leaned closer, his cologne, sandalwood and something sharper, mixing with the floral air. "I'm so glad you're here," he said, and the desperation beneath his words was a current pulling her under. He glanced around, his eyes darting to the altar, the guests, the vendors, as if searching for an exit. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" he added, his tone light but his fingers tightening around the back of a chair. Before Ebony could respond, a shadow fell over them. Isabella Langley appeared, gliding toward them like a predator in silk. Her ivory gown shimmered, her platinum blonde hair a cascade of perfection, but her smile was a blade, sharp and cold. "Darling," she said to Julian, her voice honeyed yet laced with steel, "aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The word friend dripped with disdain, as if Ebony were a smudge on her perfect day. Ebony's spine stiffened, her years of navigating dismissive clients kicking in. She extended her hand, meeting Isabella's icy blue eyes. "Ebony Carter," she said, her tone calm but unyielding. "Congratulations." Isabella's grip was a fraction too tight, her manicured nails a subtle warning. "How lovely you could make it," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "I don't believe Julian mentioned inviting you." The accusation hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in politeness. Julian shifted, his discomfort palpable, his hand brushing his tie again. "Ebony coordinated the gala last year," he said, his voice strained. "The one for foster youth. I thought she'd enjoy this." His words were a shield, but they did little to thaw Isabella's gaze. She tilted her head, appraising Ebony like a jeweler inspecting a flawed gem. "How thoughtful," she said, then turned to Julian, her hand possessive on his arm. "Darling, we should greet the other guests." The tension was a living thing, coiling around them. Ebony held Isabella's stare, refusing to shrink. She'd faced worse, clients who underestimated her, rooms where she was the only black face, but this felt personal, as if Isabella sensed something Ebony didn't yet understand. Julian hesitated, his eyes flicking to Ebony, a silent apology in their depths. "Of course," he said to Isabella, but his voice was hollow. She guided him away, her grip firm, her smile a performance for the crowd. Ebony watched them go, her heart pounding. The exchange had lasted mere minutes, but it felt like a scene from a play, each word heavy with subtext. She sank back into her chair, her mind racing. Julian's relief at seeing her, his veiled desperation, Isabella's cold suspicion, they were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve. The quartet struck up a new melody, and the guests buzzed with excitement as the ceremony loomed. Ebony's eyes lingered on Julian, now standing with Isabella, their silhouettes perfect against the altar's glow. But perfection was a lie. She saw it in the way Julian's shoulders tensed under Isabella's touch, in the way his eyes kept searching the room, as if pleading for rescue. Ebony's fingers tightened around her purse, her event planner's instincts screaming that something was wrong. Wrong. She was an outsider in this world, yet she felt caught in its currents, pulled toward a truth that lay just beyond her grasp. The Crestwood Estate's Grand Hall was a cathedral of opulence, its chandeliers casting a golden glow over rows of silk-draped chairs, each filled with guests whose wealth could rival small nations. Ebony Carter sat near the back, her sapphire gown a quiet rebellion against the sea of pastel couture. The air buzzed with anticipation, the string quartet's final notes fading into a reverent hush as the officiant, a silver-haired man in a pristine robe, took his place at the altar. Ebony's pulse hadn't settled since her tense encounter with Isabella Langley and Julian Hawthorne's desperate glance. Her fingers gripped the edge of her seat, her event planner's instincts on high alert, sensing the undercurrent of something amiss beneath the wedding's polished surface. The crowd's murmurs softened, and all eyes turned to the aisle, where the ceremony was about to unfold. Julian stood at the altar, his blonde hair catching the light like a halo, his tuxedo tailored to perfection. But his face told a different story. His skin was pale, almost ghostly, and his hands, clasped in front of him, trembled slightly, betraying the composure he fought to maintain. Ebony watched him, her chest tightening. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph, the billionaire groom sealing his fairy tale union. Yet he looked like a man marching to a guillotine. His blue eyes, once so vibrant during their dance at the gala, were now clouded, darting nervously across the crowd, as if seeking an escape that didn't exist. She wondered if anyone else noticed. The guests were too busy whispering about Isabella's gown or the estate's grandeur to see the cracks in the groom's facade. The music swelled, a triumphant orchestral piece signaling the bride's entrance. Isabella Langley appeared at the end of the aisle, a vision in ivory silk that shimmered with every step. Her platinum blonde hair was swept into an intricate updo, adorned with a diamond tiara that caught the light like a crown. She moved with calculated grace, each step a performance, her smile radiant for the photographers who lined the aisle, their cameras clicking like a swarm of insects. The crowd gasped in unison, enraptured by her beauty. But Ebony saw past the spectacle. Isabella's eyes were sharp, scanning the room not with love, but with control, ensuring every detail met her exacting standards. Her bridesmaids followed, their gold gowns like echoes of her splendor, but their faces were tight, their smiles rehearsed. As Isabella reached the altar, Julian turned to face her, his expression a brittle mask. The officiant began, his voice rich and solemn, weaving words of love and commitment. Ebony leaned forward, her breath shallow, watching Julian's every move. When it was his turn to speak his vows, his voice faltered, the words catching in his throat. "I, Julian, take you, Isabella." He paused, his eyes flickering to the crowd, and for a fleeting moment they found Ebony's. The desperation in his gaze was a silent scream, a plea she couldn't decipher but felt in her bones. He cleared his throat, pushing through, but his vows were stilted, mechanical, as if he were reading a script he didn't believe. The crowd didn't notice, their sighs of adoration drowning out the truth. Isabella's vows, in contrast, were flawless. Her voice was clear, each word delivered with the precision of a seasoned actress. "I promise to stand by your side, to honor and cherish you," she said, her smile unwavering, her eyes locked on Julian. But there was no warmth in her delivery, no spark of genuine emotion. It was a performance, polished and cold, like a contract signed in public view. Ebony's years of reading rooms told her this was no love story. It was a transaction, a merger of power and wealth disguised as romance. Her stomach churned. How many of these guests, sipping their champagne and clapping politely, saw the lie unfolding before them? The officiant's voice rose, asking if anyone objected to the union. A hush fell over the room, heavy and expectant. Ebony's heart pounded, her eyes locked on Julian. For a moment she thought he might speak, might shatter the illusion with a single word. His gaze found hers again, and time seemed to slow, the weight of his stare pulling her into his turmoil. She held her breath, willing him to act, to reveal whatever truth was clawing at him. But the moment passed, his shoulders sagging as he looked away, the silence unbroken. The officiant continued, and with a few final words, pronounced them husband and wife. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of cheers and clinking glasses. But Ebony felt like she was witnessing a tragedy. The reception began immediately, the hall transforming into a wonderland of excess. Tables overflowed with a 10-course feast, each dish a work of art: caviar canapes, truffle-infused risotto, lobster flown in from Maine. A jazz band replaced the quartet, their music lively yet unable to mask the undercurrent of tension Ebony felt. She moved through the crowd, trying to blend in, exchanging small talk with guests who spoke of yacht trips and private islands. But her eyes kept finding Julian and Isabella, now the center of attention. They played their roles perfectly, the happy couple, smiling for photos, accepting congratulations with practiced grace. Isabella held court like a queen, her laughter bright but hollow, her hand never leaving Julian's arm, a subtle claim of ownership. Julian, though, was a shadow of himself. His smiles were fleeting, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. When their gazes met across the dance floor, he held hers a beat too long, a silent message she couldn't decode. Ebony's fingers tightened around her glass, her mind racing. What was he trying to tell her? Why did his presence pull at her, stirring memories of their gala dance, a moment when he'd been real, unguarded? The reception swirled around her, a kaleidoscope of wealth and pretense. But Ebony felt anchored to Julian's silent plea. Something was coming, something that would break this perfect facade, and she was caught in its orbit, a stranger in a world of secrets, waiting for the truth to unravel. The reception at the Crestwood estate pulsed with life, the jazz band's sultry notes weaving through the clatter of crystal and the laughter of the elite. Ebony Carter stood on the fringes, her sapphire gown shimmering faintly as she watched the dance floor, where couples swayed under the chandelier's golden glow. The air was heavy with the scent of champagne and roses, but an undercurrent of unease clung to her, a residue of Julian Hawthorne's haunted gaze and Isabella Langley's icy suspicion. Ebony's fingers toyed with her purse, her event planner's instinct screaming that the perfect wedding was a stage, and the real drama was yet to unfold. She sipped her water, staying sharp, her eyes tracking Julian across the room. He stood beside Isabella, smiling for the guests, but his shoulders were rigid, his movements mechanical, like a man trapped in a role he couldn't escape. As the band transitioned to a slower tune, Julian broke away from the crowd, his blonde hair catching the light as he moved with purpose. He approached Ebony, his presence a quiet storm in the festive chaos. "Would you like to see the gardens?" he asked, his voice low, almost too casual, but his blue eyes burned with intensity. "They're beautiful at night." Ebony's pulse quickened. The invitation felt like more than a stroll. It was a lifeline, a signal she couldn't ignore. She nodded, setting her glass down, and followed him through the French doors onto a terrace overlooking the estate's sprawling gardens. The night was a velvet canvas, the full moon casting silver light over manicured hedges and blooming jasmine. Fireflies danced in the distance, their glow a soft counterpoint to the mansion's brilliance. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and flowers, and for a moment it felt like they'd stepped into another world, far from the artifice inside. Julian led her down a stone path, his steps quick, his hands shoved into his pockets as if to keep them from trembling. Ebony followed, her heels sinking slightly into the soft ground, her heart pounding with the weight of the unknown. The music from the reception faded, replaced by the whisper of leaves and the distant chirp of crickets. Julian stopped near a marble fountain, its water glinting under the moonlight. He turned to face her, his face pale, his eyes wild with something close to panic. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice shaking, barely above a whisper. "I know this is strange, having you here, but I needed someone real tonight." His words hung in the air, raw and unguarded, slicing through the night's calm. Ebony's breath caught, her mind racing to make sense of his urgency. Before she could speak, he grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with a desperate need that sent a jolt through her. He glanced back toward the mansion, ensuring they were alone, then leaned closer, his voice dropping to a fervent whisper. "Don't let me marry her." The words hit Ebony like a thunderclap, stealing her air. She stepped back, her eyes wide, searching his face for clarity. "What do you mean?" she managed, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "You just married her." Julian ran his hands through his hair, destroying its perfect styling, his composure unraveling. "The ceremony was just for show," he said, his words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "The real marriage, the legal one, happens tomorrow. Private, just family and lawyers. But Ebony, I can't do it. I can't spend my life with someone who—" He stopped, his gaze darting to the reception's distant glow, as if Isabella might appear at any moment. "Someone who what?" Ebony pressed, her voice firm, grounding him. Julian's eyes met hers, raw with pain. "Someone who doesn't love me. Someone who's only marrying me because her family will destroy my company if she doesn't. Someone who's been blackmailing me for months." The confession poured out, a torrent of secrets he'd held too long. Ebony's mind reeled as he explained. Isabella's family had dirt on his business partner, falsified documents that could tank their tech empire, costing thousands of jobs. The marriage was their price for silence, a deal to secure their power. "They've had me trapped," he said, his voice breaking. "Every step I take, they're watching, tightening the noose." Ebony stared at him, the billionaire who had everything, wealth, power, fame, reduced to a man pleading for freedom. Her heart ached, but her mind raced with questions. "Julian, this is insane," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Why me? Why are you telling me this?" His eyes softened, a flicker of the man she'd met at the gala, the one who'd danced with her and spoken of dreams. "Because you're the only person who's ever seen me," he said. "Not the billionaire, not the empire, just Julian. That night at the gala, you listened. You cared. I've been surrounded by people who want something from me, but you were real." The weight of his words settled on her, heavy and undeniable. The fountain's soft trickle filled the silence, a stark contrast to the storm in her chest. She wanted to argue, to tell him to find another way, but his desperation was a mirror to her own buried longing, for a life beyond the ordinary, for a chance to matter. Before she could respond, footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Ebony's heart leapt as Isabella's silhouette appeared at the terrace's edge, her gown glowing under the moonlight. "There you are, darling," Isabella called, her voice sweet but edged with steel. "People are asking for the happy couple." Her eyes flicked to Ebony, cold and appraising, a predator sizing up prey. Julian's body tensed, his hand dropping from Ebony's arm. "We were just getting some air," he said, his voice strained. Isabella's smile tightened, her gaze never leaving Ebony. "I'm sure you were," she said, then added, "Ebony, isn't it? How nice you're enjoying the party." The words were a dismissal, a command to retreat. Julian looked at Ebony, his eyes pleading for something she couldn't yet name, then followed Isabella back toward the reception, his steps heavy. Ebony stood alone by the fountain, the night's beauty now a shroud for the secrets she carried, her mind a battlefield of doubt and resolve. The Crestwood estate pulsed with the rhythm of celebration, the jazz band's lively notes mingling with the clink of crystal and the laughter of guests drunk on champagne and status. Ebony Carter lingered near the edge of the reception hall, her sapphire gown catching the chandelier's glow, her heart still racing from Julian Hawthorne's whispered confession in the garden. His words, "Don't let me marry her," echoed in her mind, a desperate plea laced with blackmail and betrayal. She scanned the crowd, her event planner's instincts on overdrive, noting the security guards in dark suits stationed discreetly near the exits, their eyes sharp and watchful. Isabella Langley held court at the center of the room, her ivory gown a beacon of perfection, her smile a mask that never faltered. Julian stood beside her, his blonde hair immaculate, but his posture rigid, a prisoner in a gilded cage. Ebony's fingers tightened around her purse, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and adrenaline. Julian's revelation had shaken her, his tech empire, his freedom, his very life held hostage by Isabella's family. She wanted to run, to retreat to her safe, predictable world, but the memory of his eyes, raw with desperation, anchored her. She was an outsider here, yet somehow she'd become his lifeline. The band struck up a new song, and the dance floor swelled with couples, their movements a blur of silk and diamonds. Ebony's gaze found Julian again, his forced smile cracking as he glanced her way, a silent signal that time was running out. Then he was moving, weaving through the crowd with a purpose that made her heart lurch. He reached her, his presence a quiet storm in the festive chaos. "Ebony," he said, his voice low, urgent, his blue eyes wild with panic. "She knows I'm planning something. Her security's been watching me all night. If I'm going to do this, it has to be now." His words hit like a gust of wind, sharp and unrelenting. Ebony's breath caught, her mind racing to process the stakes. "Julian, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. "You can't just run away. What about your company, your employees, your life?" "What life?" he shot back, his voice breaking, raw with a truth he'd buried too long. "I'm 35, Ebony, and I've never been truly happy. I've built an empire, but it's a cage. If I marry Isabella tomorrow, I'll have everything and nothing at once." His hands clenched, his knuckles white, as if holding himself together by sheer will. He leaned closer, his cologne, sandalwood and steel, mixing with the floral air. "I have a plane waiting at a private airfield. I've been planning this for weeks. I can disappear, start over somewhere else, but I can't do it alone. I need someone I trust." Ebony's heart pounded, her thoughts a tangle of fear and possibility. "Why me?" she asked, though a part of her already knew. Julian's eyes softened, a flicker of the man she'd met at the gala, the one who'd danced with her under chandeliers and spoken of dreams. "Because you're the only person who's never wanted anything from me except an honest conversation," he said. "You saw Julian, not the billionaire. I need that now, someone who sees what's real." His words were a weight, pulling her toward a decision that could unravel her carefully built life. She glanced at the reception, where Isabella laughed with a senator, her eyes flicking toward them, sharp as a hawk's. The security guards shifted, their gazes narrowing. Time was slipping away. Ebony's mind raced, her small apartment, her steady job, her plans for a future she'd mapped out in careful steps. But Julian's plea stirred something deeper, a longing for a life less ordinary, a chance to break free of her own constraints. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said, her voice low, resolute. "Come with me," Julian said, his words urgent but clear. "Not romantically, just as a friend. Help me start over. I have resources. I can help you build your own business. Follow your dreams. We can both be free." The idea was insane, a plot from a movie, yet his sincerity made it real. Ebony's eyes met his, seeing the hope and fear intertwined, a mirror to her own. She thought of the gala, of the moment they'd connected, two souls seeing each other clearly in a world of pretense. "Okay," she said, the word escaping before she could second-guess it. "What do we need to do?" Julian's relief was palpable, his shoulders easing slightly. "There's a car waiting in the service area," he said. "We need a distraction to keep Isabella and security busy while I slip away. Can you do that?" Ebony nodded, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Years of managing events had taught her how to create chaos when needed. "Give me 5 minutes," she said, her voice firm. "Then head for the service entrance." She turned back to the reception, her heart thundering as she scanned the room. The band played on, the guests oblivious to the storm brewing. Ebony spotted the wedding planner, a frazzled woman juggling a clipboard and a headset. She approached, her voice urgent but controlled. "There's an issue with the cake table," she lied, pointing vaguely toward the dessert station. "It's wobbling. Could collapse any second." The planner's eyes widened, and she rushed off, barking orders into her headset. Ebony moved swiftly, weaving through the crowd until she reached a waiter balancing a tray of champagne flutes. With a calculated stumble, she bumped into him, sending the tray crashing to the floor. Glass shattered, champagne sprayed, and guests gasped, their dresses soaked, their voices rising in a chorus of shock. Chaos erupted, a perfect storm of confusion. Ebony slipped through the crowd, her pulse racing, her gown brushing against silk and satin as she made for the service entrance. She glanced back, catching sight of Isabella, her face a mask of fury as she directed security to manage the mess. Julian was nowhere in sight. He'd taken his chance. Ebony's breath hitched, adrenaline surging. She just set a billionaire's escape in motion, and there was no turning back. The night air whipped past as the black sedan sped away from the Crestwood estate, its tires humming against the asphalt, carrying Ebony Carter and Julian Hawthorne into the unknown. Ebony's heart pounded, her sapphire gown bunched around her knees, the adrenaline from their escape still coursing through her veins. The Champagne Tower crash she'd orchestrated had bought them precious minutes, the chaos of shattered glass and outraged guests masking their exit. She glanced at Julian, now in dark clothes that replaced his tailored tuxedo, his blonde hair disheveled, his blue eyes fixed on the road ahead. The man who'd stood at the altar, a billionaire trapped in a gilded cage, was gone. In his place was someone raw, resolute, and terrifyingly free. The dashboard clock glowed 1:45 a.m., the world outside a blur of shadows and distant lights. Ebony's mind raced. Had she just helped a man escape his destiny, or had she leapt into a mistake she couldn't undo? The driver, a silent figure in a black cap, navigated the winding roads with precision, the car cutting through the darkness toward a private airfield. Julian leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "We're almost there," he said, his words more for himself than for her. "The jet's fueled and ready." Ebony nodded, her throat tight, her thoughts a tangle of fear and exhilaration. She glanced out the rear window, half expecting to see security lights flashing in pursuit. The estate's glow faded behind them, but the weight of what they'd done lingered, heavy as the night itself. "Julian," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "are you sure about this? Once we leave, there's no going back." He turned to her, his face illuminated by the faint glow of passing streetlights, his eyes fierce with conviction. "I've never been more sure," he said. "I've spent years building something I thought was enough. Money, power, a name. But it's nothing if I'm not free to live it." His voice softened, a flicker of gratitude in his gaze. "Thank you, Ebony. I know what I'm asking you to give up." She wanted to argue, to list the life she was leaving behind. Her apartment, her job, her careful plans. But the truth was, she felt alive, electric, as if she'd been sleepwalking until this moment. The car slowed as they reached the airfield, a small, private strip hidden among rolling hills. A sleek jet waited on the tarmac, its engines idling, its silver hull glinting under floodlights. The driver pulled up beside it, and Julian opened the door, motioning for Ebony to follow. Her heels sank into the grass as she stepped out, the cool air a shock against her skin. The jet's door was open, a steward waiting at the top of the stairs, his face impassive. Julian paused, turning to her, his expression a mix of resolve and vulnerability. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "No pressure, Ebony. You've already done more than I could have asked." She looked back toward the road, the distant lights of the estate now just a memory. Her life in Atlanta flashed before her, long hours coordinating events, nights alone in her small apartment, dreams she'd shelved for stability. Then she looked at Julian, a man who'd had everything yet nothing, his freedom hinging on this moment. Something stirred in her, a spark of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm, a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff and trusting she'd land. Julian's relief was palpable, a faint smile breaking through his tension as he gestured toward the jet. They boarded quickly, the cabin a cocoon of luxury, leather seats, polished wood, a bar stocked with crystal decanters. Ebony sank into a seat, her gown pooling around her, feeling out of place, yet oddly at home. Julian sat across from her, buckling in as the jet's engines roared to life. "Where are we going?" she asked, the question hanging between them like a lifeline. Julian leaned back, his eyes distant but calm. "Somewhere we can figure out what comes next," he said. "Somewhere we can be ourselves." The vagueness should have unsettled her, but it didn't. For the first time, the unknown felt like a promise, not a threat. The jet lifted off, the ground falling away, the city's lights shrinking to pinpricks below. Ebony pressed her face to the window, watching the world she knew disappear. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with a strange, wild freedom. She thought of the gala, of Julian's hand in hers, the way he'd seen her when no one else did. Now they were bound by something bigger, a shared leap into the abyss. Julian's voice broke her thoughts. "I know I don't deserve this," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "You're giving up everything, and I'll make it worth it. I promise." His sincerity was a weight, grounding her in the surreal moment. She shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe we both deserve a chance to choose our own lives," she said. The words felt true, a truth she hadn't named until now. The jet climbed higher, the stars visible through the window, each one a possibility. Ebony's mind flickered to Isabella, her cold smile and sharper eyes, the security guards who'd likely realized Julian was gone. Would they come after them? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she pushed it aside. She'd chosen this path, and there was no turning back. As the jet leveled off, Julian leaned forward, his voice softer now. "I've got people I trust waiting for us," he said. "We'll be safe, and we'll figure out the rest together." Ebony nodded, her exhaustion mingling with exhilaration. She looked at him, seeing not the billionaire but the man, scared, hopeful, human. The cabin was quiet, save for the hum of the engines, and in that silence Ebony felt a shift. She wasn't just running from something, she was running towards something, a life unscripted, a chance to redefine herself. The stars outside seemed to whisper that anything was possible, and for the first time in years, Ebony believed it. The cafe in the Portuguese coastal town was a sanctuary of warmth, its walls adorned with faded nautical maps, and the air rich with the scent of espresso and sea salt. Ebony Carter sat at a corner table, her laptop open, her fingers hovering over the keys as she pieced together the story of her life's most reckless leap. The sapphire gown was long gone, replaced by a simple linen dress that caught the ocean breeze drifting through the open window. Across from her, Julian Hawthorne sipped a coffee, his blonde hair tousled by the wind, his blue eyes no longer haunted but bright with purpose. 6 months had passed since their escape from the Crestwood estate, yet the weight of that night lingered, a shadow now giving way to light. Ebony's world had unraveled and reformed, and today, as sunlight danced on the cobblestone street outside, she was ready to confront the truth that had reshaped her. The accident came first, a blur of screeching tires and shattering glass that stole her memories. She'd woken in a hospital, Julian at her side, his face etched with worry. Fragments of her past were gone, gaps in her mind where months should have been. But Julian's presence was a constant, his voice gentle as he filled in the blanks. They hadn't just met at the gala. They'd been lovers, meeting in secret, their connection a quiet rebellion against his world of wealth and her life of caution. The revelation hit like a wave, each returning memory, stolen nights, whispered dreams, his hand in hers, a piece of a puzzle she was desperate to complete. But the accident wasn't fate's cruelty. It was Isabella Langley's doing, a calculated act of vengeance for their escape. Julian had spent months unraveling Isabella's plot, his tech empire's resources turned toward justice. He'd hired investigators, combed through digital trails, and unearthed a web of deceit. Text messages between Isabella and a hired driver, bank transfers to offshore accounts. A recorded conversation where she coldly planned to remove the problem. Ebony. The evidence was ironclad, a testament to Isabella's desperation to keep Julian bound to her family's power. Ebony's hands trembled as she recalled the trial, a media circus that had gripped the world. She'd sat in the courtroom, her memories still patchy, watching Isabella take the stand. The heiress's platinum blonde hair was pulled tight, her face a mask of defiance, but her eyes betrayed fear as the prosecutor laid out the case. The courtroom had been a battlefield, every seat filled, cameras flashing outside. Isabella's lawyers, a team of sharp-suited sharks, tried to spin her as a victim, a scorned bride betrayed by a runaway groom. But Julian's evidence was relentless. Timestamps, audio, witnesses who'd seen the hired driver near Ebony's car. The driver himself, facing jail time, confessed, his voice shaking as he described Isabella's orders to stage the crash. Ebony's testimony, though fragmented, was raw, her voice steady as she recounted waking to a world that felt incomplete. The jury deliberated for only a day before delivering their verdict. Guilty. Isabella was sentenced to 7 years for attempted murder and fraud, her family's influence crumbling as their secrets spilled into the open. The tabloids feasted for weeks, but Isabella, once a queen, was reduced to a footnote. As Ebony's memories returned, like stars emerging at dusk, she pieced together their love. Late-night walks in Atlanta, Julian's laughter as they shared cheap wine, her dreams of building an event-planning empire mirrored by his desire to use his wealth for good. The accident had stolen those moments, but love, it seemed, was stronger than memory. In their seaside home, a modest villa with whitewashed walls and a view of the ocean, they rebuilt. Julian's company thrived, freed from the Langley family's grip, its profits now funding their foundation. A lifeline for those trapped by circumstance, from abusive relationships to financial ruin. Ebony led the outreach, her event planner's precision now organizing safe havens and new beginnings. She looked across the table at Julian, his face softened by the morning light. A man no longer running but rooted. "We did it," she said, her voice quiet but sure. He reached for her hand, his touch familiar, a tether to the life they'd reclaimed. "You did it," he replied, his smile warm. "You gave me the courage to jump." Ebony shook her head, her braids swaying. "We jumped together," she said, and the truth of it settled between them, a bond forged in crisis and tempered by time. Outside, the town bustled with life, fishermen hauling nets, children laughing in the square, the ocean whispering its endless song. Ebony closed her laptop, the story of their escape now written, a testament to their resilience. She thought of Isabella, locked away, her power stripped, her name fading from the headlines. The scandal had been a storm, but it passed, leaving Ebony and Julian to build something real. Their foundation had already helped dozens, each story a reminder of why they'd risked everything. Ebony's dreams, once shelved, were taking shape. A business plan for her agency, funded by Julian's resources but driven by her vision. The cafe's bell chimed as a customer entered, and Ebony glanced at Julian, his eyes reflecting the sea. She saw not the billionaire, but the man who'd chosen her, who'd fought for her when her memories faltered. The accident had taken pieces of her, but it had given her something, too. A chance to choose authenticity over safety, love over fear. As the sun climbed higher, painting the town gold, Ebony felt whole, her past and present woven together. She and Julian weren't just survivors, they were creators, building a life where every day was a choice, every moment a victory. What would you have done in Ebony's shoes? Risk everything for a stranger's desperate plea, or stay safe in the life you know? Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us where you're tuning in from. Maybe Lisbon, Lagos, or somewhere closer to home? Your perspective fuels our stories, and we're so grateful for every one of you joining us on this wild ride. If you love diving into Julian and Ebony's tale of courage and renewal, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to catch our next adventure. We can't wait to bring you more stories that spark your imagination and heart. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep chasing what's real.